Hello and welcome to the EdTech Society Masterclass. We are so glad you are here. And before we start, introduce our speaker today, just want to talk a little bit about EdTech Society. EdTech Society, it's a non-profit organization started in India. And so our main goal is to bring a professional forum between the researchers and educators. So we do offer monthly masterclasses every on different topics, almost every month, and we have different panel sessions and in focus interview, and so different things that's related to educational technology we usually talk about. And we do have a annual event, annual conference. It's called T4E, Technology for Education. And this year it's happening in next week in December 6th, 7th, and 8th in IIT Gandhinagar. So if you have time and resources, please do join us, and we will be having different presentations, panel sessions, keynote speaker. And for more information, so please do visit EdTech Society website. We will share that link at the chat as well. And if you have any questions regarding today's presentation, so please put that your questions and comments in the YouTube comment section, and we will, if it's very relevant, we will post it, show it in our live session as well. So without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker. So let me bring our speaker today, Dr. Lucian Ngeze. He is a lecturer at University of Dodoma, Tanzania. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Lucian to our masterclass. And Dr. Lucian has a PhD in education technology from IIT Bombay, and so he has more than 10 years of experience in teacher training, professional development, and so today he also trained more than 1,000 teachers on different technology integration. And so we are so excited to hear about today's topic on the cascading, the practical strategies of how to do a professional development. So we are so glad to invite you for our platform today, Dr. Lucian. So the stage is yours, and thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Briju, for the invitation, and I'm so happy to be participating in the masterclass number 25 today, trying to share the experiences on teacher training and more focusing on cascaded teacher training programs. So as you introduced me, I'm also an alumni of IIT Bombay, and I'm so happy to be able to join the EdTech Society to be able to share my own experiences on how we have been conducting masterclasses and on how best we have been implementing cascaded training in teacher training programs in Tanzania. So before wasting time, let me go straight to my presentation. So this will be my outline of my presentation. I'm going to give a bigger picture, a little bit of the teacher education in Tanzania, and then I will discuss a little bit on the structure of cascaded TPT programs and how we design them in the context of our training programs in Tanzania. And then we'll also look into the components of a cascaded TPT programs. So, and then finally we come to look into the strategies now on how we can be able to incorporate, to design effective cascaded teacher professional development programs. So, okay, this diagram here shows the teacher education hierarchy in Tanzania. So what we do, basically we produce teachers in two ways. The first way on the left is on teacher training colleges, where the teachers who come from the teacher training colleges are those who are diploma holders, and then the diploma holders will always be teaching teachers at primary school level. And then there are teachers who come from the higher learning institutions direction, which is on the right side of the diagram. And these are the teachers who graduate with degree programs, so different degrees in the education field. and then these will be qualified to teach at secondary school level, or some of them might go to teach even in teacher training colleges as well. Now, from literature, when you speak of teachers, we have to ensure that they are capacitated, to ensure that the students can be able to improve their own learning experiences, but at the same time to ensure that there is also some gains that happens as the teachers are training or are teaching in their own classrooms. So when you speak of TPD, or teacher professional development, it's more on the knowledge and skills and the expertise of teachers that they get after going through a certain teacher training program that is designed for them to be able to capacitate themselves in some different aspects. So a TPD program is anything that is programmed well and instructional focused, that empowers teachers to be able to improve understanding of students in their own classrooms, but with many other benefits when they're teaching in the classrooms. Now, when we look into literature again, Guski gives us the goals of a TPD. He says that a TPD is initiating change in classroom teaching practices, but again, it gives us a change in student learning outcome. And finally, we hope there is a change in teachers' attitude and beliefs as they apply what they learn back in their own classes. Now, when we speak of teacher professional development programs, we speak of teacher training models and how can we be able to impart skills and knowledge and competencies in many ways on our teachers that we produce. There are a lot of teacher professional development models that have been documented in literature. So you start all the way from training models, the award-bearing model, all the way to communities of practice, which are commonly being used today because of the technologies and how they can be able to interact in many ways. But again, we speak of the cascaded teacher training model that is also common when we want to train teachers, many teachers at one time, but again, to reduce the cost that might incur when we train small groups of teachers for a long period of time. Now, let's look into the structure of any cascaded program. So any cascaded program, we have at least a structure which is from the top where we have the program designers, and then we'll have in the middle where you have the actual training where some resource trainers train a group of teachers. And then below we have the teacher now who has been trained, who has to go down to train other teachers. Now let us now focus on the first level of the cascaded teacher training program. So on the top level, we have a group of experts who are called program designers or educational experts who actually, first of all, do the needs analysis to see what the teachers need, what are the requirements, and what actually are we going to design to be able to help the teachers be able to gain this expertise and skills. And then after gaining the knowledge about what they need, the teachers, they have to go to the training design part. Now they make sure that they put a lay or a foundation of what actually these skills the teachers need, and then in how they can be able to orchestrate them into the classroom. And finally, it's a team that also develops teacher training content. So depending on the modules that have been generated after the needs analysis, you can be able to develop also the training content depending on the requirement. And finally, as the training is unfolding, we get to see how they are doing assessment and then monitoring the progress. And then toward the end, they have to do evaluation and then be able to report on what were their observations. Now, if we look into the second category, which is in the middle, this is another group of teachers who are experienced, whom we call the master trainers or the expert trainers or the primary trainers from literature, who are the experts now who have been trained by the program designers to cascade the training to other groups of teachers. So these are the trainers who are more knowledgeable in the content area where these teachers need skills and expertise. And then they have to train the first layer of the teachers who are going to be now the secondary trainers expected to cascade down the training all the way to other groups or to other teachers, maybe back in their own schools or to the schools that might be adjacent to the school where they're coming from. So it all depends on the setting and how you are actually putting the layout. And finally, the bottom layer is the layer where we have now those teachers who have been trained for a number of days, probably on a training center. They have to go down back to their own schools or the schools adjacent to their own schools, and then be able to do the same training back to those groups of teachers. And these teachers, these trainers are now called secondary trainers because they are one layer below the primary trainer. And then sometimes they say they're called as resource trainers or RTs. That's also found in literature as well. Now, this is now a bigger picture combining all the three phases, excluding the expert phase. But now we see the master trainer training a large group of participants who are teachers, who later will go back to their own schools and train another group of teachers back in their own schools or in the schools adjacent to their own, so depending on the design and how you're implementing it. Now, from literature, we see that there are a number of challenges when we design cascaded training programs. So there are issues like the longer periods between when you train the secondary trainer and when they have to go back to train the other groups. But there are also issues on emphasis on instruction practices, where it's more on content than on how you can be able to go back and make training to other teachers. But again, in most cases, when we design cascaded training programs, it's more on top-down approach. I mean, you get instructions from the top, and then you have to cascade it all the way down. There is nothing like a feedback that comes back all the way up to see how it's happening in the movement between the training sessions and how implementation is really taking place on the ground. And in some cases, when you read literature, you'll be able to see that it's something like a one-way transmission of training, where training comes from all the way on to top, and then it goes down all the way to the teachers. Now, in between, there is nothing really that is being done to see how it's happening, how the teachers are faring, and in what ways are they doing it, and to what extent are they really improving in terms of how they are doing it. Now, there are also challenges related to the trainers themselves. Now, in this context, the secondary trainer. So some trainers in literature, it's reported that they are not very confident to be able to go back to train because on the nature on how they were trained when they were actually receiving training from the master trainers. But again, in some cases, when you look into how they're training, you'll see that there is also some misinterpretation of the curriculum because they don't really see the connection between the content that was trained on and what is on their own curriculum. That misinterpretation brings about a lot of confusion, which implies therefore that even cascading it back to their own teachers becomes cumbersome in some way. And finally, there are issues on dilution of the content. So when you tell them about some technological terms or terminologies, it becomes hard for them to go back and use the same terminology. So in some way, they make it simpler, which might distort the meaning or the context, the expected message from the context where they're going to share that particular terminology. Now, if we have to unfold the process of cascading the training, so we see on top we have what you call the training design. So there will be the designers, the experts, putting down all the requirements of the teachers after the needs analysis. And then after that, these expert designers come back and train the master trainer, where you have the training center, and then master trainers will go back and train those teachers who will later become secondary trainers. So it's a chain where you see the training designers on top, and then you come to the training part where these teachers are collected from different schools. They are brought and trained for some days, and then after that, they have to go back down to their own schools or to adjacent schools and then be able to provide the same training as it was given on the top layer. Now, if we see this, we see that there are a number of phases where, which take place as we do the cascading. So on top, again, as I said, you have the planning stage where it's more on the program design part. That is the topmost, where you design depending on the context and depending on the requirements you gathered from the training needs analysis. Now, after that, the next layer is the layer on the training center, where actually the master trainers now do the actual training of the resource trainers or the secondary trainers. So this might take some days depending on the design. So in some cases, in the context of Tanzania, it will be from Monday to Friday, and then on Saturday they depart. So it's like 5 days training where they're immersed into content and other skills that they need for training. Then after that, when the training is done, what we expect is that they have to go back to their own schools and then do the training again. So now there is a time gap that elapses between the time when they have done the training from the training center and then to the time when they're doing real implementation back in their own schools or adjacent schools. So that delay also has some factors in terms of how they remember the content, how they remember the procedure, the processes, which needs really to be able to see how much you can be able to, to do away with the delays that might happen. Now, towards the last section is where we are having now the actual training by the secondary trainers or the resource trainers who have been trained on top there. So this is when the resource trainers or the master trainer, or the secondary trainers go back to their own schools and do the same training, or plan. First of all, they have to plan the training, and then they have to, on the content, refine the content depending on the need, and then they have to do the actual training back into their own to their own teachers. And then in some cases, in our context, for example, there are also some adjacent teachers, adjacent schools where some teachers will come from those adjacent schools coming to this main school where these teachers were, allocated, who are going to provide the training. So it really all depends on how you are designing it and what the parameters you're going to put into perspective as you're making that design for your teachers. Now let's see what happens on each of the sections of the cascaded training program. So what we have to think of when we think of the planning phase or the program design phase, a lot of questions that come into perspective is how you are selecting the participants to come to this particular training center. So in some cases, in my experience, we have had some trainings where some teachers came to a training program and it was about ICT and ICT basics and skills. But then you find that you're bringing teachers onto the training center who do not have any skill of ICT. So even those who are actually failing even to touch a mouse. So they're coming there and then we expect them to go back and do the training to their own teachers. So what is important here on the first phase is that ensure that you're doing a perfect selection of participants whom you think will really be able to do the job of translating your training back to your own context. So think of the features that you think will be relevant to them to come, and then which you think will really be useful for you when they get the training and go back to do it. So it could be like you are thinking of the features like maybe prior knowledge of computer basics, or maybe prior knowledge of some software application tools. All these factors should really be seen outside as selection criteria or inclusion criteria that would make these teachers who are coming to a training program for the purpose of cascading the same training program back into their own context work well. And I'm talking in the context of ICT because I've worked more on ICT integration, but it could be also in some other program designs, depending on the context. It could be maybe competence-based implementation program design, or it could be something on education management. So anyhow, you have to think of how you are selecting the participants coming into your own training program for the purpose of cascading your training. Because if you don't do a perfect selection, then there'll be issues of dilution of content, but there'll be issues of confidence, lacking confidence to be able to go and train other teachers back, in their own schools. Now let's go to the second layer. The second layer of the cascade is on the training center now, where now we see our master trainers coming into perspective and training a large group of teachers who have been drawn from different schools coming to a training center. So in my experience, we have had training sessions where we had a training center having about 60 teachers, or it could be 70 teachers or 55 teachers, all drawn from different schools. Maybe one school, you might find that there are 3 teachers coming from one school, 2 teachers, 4 teachers, depending on the requirement and need of the country at that particular time. So what is really important to think of when you reach at this stage is think of the infrastructure availability into that training center. If it's a training program that involves ICT or ICT skills or digital skills, then we expect whether you have the infrastructure like computer labs around, or you use the bring your own device principle, where you instruct those participants to come with their own laptops or devices for engaging them into the training program. But again, ensure that you have the actual practices. When the teachers are being trained, ensure that they are actually doing the actual practice. If it's about a software tool, ensure that they're doing the software tool so that in the end, they can also be able to do the same when they go back in their own context, in their own schools. But on the other hand, look into the way, give them activities that might be able to attract them to be able to do something more. For example, think of giving them micro-teaching sessions in between so that you give them confidence and power to be able to go and do the same when they go back into their own context. So micro-teaching session will allow them to take a small portion of the training and then train a small group of their fellow participants, and then in the end do some reflection to see what could be improved and what worked well and what didn't work well, so that training becomes much more useful and meaningful in that context. Now, the other layer is on the time lapse between the training program and the implementation on the raw level. So it has been observed that the more these trained teachers stay without practicing or using it, the more the content will be, the more the knowledge and skills will actually evaporate, go away. So So think of the time that is going to take between when they finish the training from the training center all the way to doing the actual training. It will be 1 week, it will be 1 month, but see, if it's a longer period of time that is going to take place in between, then maybe you need to think of putting some activities or engaging the teachers in some communities of practice in between so that they get to reflect on their practices. So they have regular meetings where they discuss issues on the line of those contents so that at least they are refining and keeping them updated all the time. If it is taking too long and nothing is happening in between, it might be that they are really going to forget everything, and therefore the training might not work or bring the desired impact. And finally, this is on the ground where we speak about now the teacher is going to do the actual training. So it's in a school setting now. Now, what is important here is let these school teachers who are being trained take some time to plan and then think of them doing ownership of the content. So if there is any modification that's needed, let them do modification. If there is anything that's needed to be put in place in terms of infrastructure, put the infrastructure in place so that when they're doing the training, it becomes much more real as it was in the case when they were attending a training on the training center. So ensure that there are facilities that are required. So if it's a computer facility or computer lab, ensure that it is there. Or if they do not have devices, provide them with devices so that when the training is really happening, it can be meaningful and they can also be able to do practice accordingly and then improve their own skills and knowledge as they go. So these are some of the things that we need to consider when we go through a number of stages, especially when you unfold the stages that we go through during a cascaded TPD program design. Now I'm trying to take you through a number of projects. I'm trying to take you through a number of projects that you have been able to implement back in my country. So I have been lucky to be able to participate in two of the projects that we have been doing here in Tanzania. So one is called EQSEZ and the other one is Boost project. So I'm going to give the details of what the projects were about. So in the first project, it's a project that we have done in Zanzibar. Zanzibar is part of Tanzania, which is in the island in the Indian Ocean. So we were designing a project called Enhancing the Quality of Secondary School Education in Tanzania, in Zanzibar. And the overall goal was basically to ensure better teaching learning in secondary schools. We were focusing on mathematics, science, and English teachers, because in our context, mathematics, English, and science are subjects where in national examinations, they're always performing low. So we focused on those areas. So it's a project that's ending this year in December, and the funders are Koikam. So my role in this project was assistant lead consultant. So I had a senior who was with me working this project. What we did in this project, okay, the second project is that we did is what we call Boost project, which is basically for improving equitable access to quality learning in primary and pre-primary and primary school in education in Tanzania. It's a project that is ongoing because we are still having a lot of activities happening. But in my case, I focused on digital skills for primary school teachers, and we trained 400 school teachers, of which we expected them to be able to cascade the same training. For the case in Zanzibar, we trained 14 master trainers, and then in the process, we also trained 173 resource trainers. Our target was to ensure that we have 1,357 math, science, and English teachers trained after that layer of resource trainers being trained. You go down and train the same. Now, I try to unpack how each of the activities happened. So from the first phase, when we do the planning, we ensure that we select the right people who would be able to cascade the training. For example, for the case of master trainers, we selected experts who developed teacher training modules before and facilitation guidelines before. So they are the experts who were conversant in the subject areas where they're focusing on, but again, they had participated in the process of creating teacher training modules and also the manuals. Now, for the resource trainers, we ensured that those resource trainers we invited to the training had some training experiences in terms of being resource trainers, or had some training experiences in secondary school at any level for the past 2 years. So they were at least having some skills on teacher training that would be brought onto the table for ensuring that they could be able to cascade the training as they go back into their own schools. Now, so what we did now, so we ensure that during the design, the less content that is manageable. We ensured that the content was less. We didn't like to put a lot of content in the process because we knew that if we train them with a lot of content, it will be tough for them to be able to complain the content, and then it won't be useful really for the cascading process. So we ensure that content is really very slow, very small, so that it becomes manageable for them to be able to go back and train other groups of teachers. But again, we ensure that while we are designing the training programs, we have a number of activities in between so that the teachers really get to do a lot of practices in between, and they become confident and competent in the areas where we wanted them to be able to do the training program. And therefore, that helped them much more to ensure that they kept moving and engaging in the content as well. But towards the end of the training, on the last day of the training, we gave them a training on facilitation skills, on how best you can be able to communicate the content to your teachers back when you go back to schools. But again, the facilitation skills like communication skills, how you talk to them, and then how you design your training program, how you manage the trainers in terms of the age. So adult learning principles all coming into perspective to ensure that you can also be able to produce the same content to the adult learners who are into your classroom. So some of the considerations that we thought at that particular program, when we were designing the training program, included those as explained. Now let's go to the training center. We are now, the resource trainers are being trained by the master trainers, and then looking into how we can be able to ensure that there is quality in terms of how they're going back into their own schools and cascade the same training. So in this, when they were doing the training, so we had a number of activities that kept them engaged to ensure that there is no one is left behind. For example, every time we started a cohort, we had to ensure that there is administration in terms of the chairperson of those trainers, and then the secretary and timekeeper. That kept them moved because the chairman could always remind them on what to do, what to keep on time, ensure that you are there on time, to sign, to attend. Everything was done by this chairman. But again, the participants were engaged in many activities. For example, in discussions, they had a lot of activities that involved discussions and presentations. And then towards the third and fourth days, they were also doing some micro-teaching sessions, for example, in physics, chemistry, and biology subjects, where they wanted to be able to see how best you can be able to integrate technology in teaching and learning. And therefore, they're given smaller portions of the lesson, and then taught them to be able to redesign the lesson, and then do the micro-teaching session with the same participants, where you want to present the same content to them, and then see how you're orchestrating. As they did the micro-teaching session, they were also able to receive a number of feedback from their colleagues, but at the same time from the master trainers, because the master trainers were dissolved into the training programs, and therefore they were monitoring and moving here and there, seeing what is happening, and then trying to ensure that the resource trainers are really moving in the direction they wanted. And then you also had a number of educational officers, maybe the permanent secretary coming into the training session, looking into what's happening and trying to inspire the teacher trainers or the resource trainers to ensure that they are grasping the content, they know how to train, so that when they go back into the training session, it becomes easier for them to be able to go. So that was one part where we were focusing on. But again, as we did the training, we had a number of reflections, especially in the evening when before departing, we had the session where the teachers were reflecting on what they have been able to learn, how they can be able to take it and then improve it as they go back into your own context, and what they can be able to do to ensure that no dilution is happening in terms of the content. So the reflection helped them be able to know their weaknesses and then improve them in the next day to ensure that they are participating in the program. And then we also had daily training evaluations. We shared a number of questions where we wanted to know what could we be able to improve for the next day, and then what has been the challenge, and what could we be able to do to solve that particular challenge. This was given normally on a Google form, where teachers were given the link to the Google form and then submitted the links online. For us, for the master trainers, they had to open up the links and then scan to see the responses, and then make a summary of what they have been able to see that could be used tomorrow morning as they do the morning recap. They could be able to be given a feedback on what transpired in the last meeting, and then what we are going to do to improve the situation as we go. And again, we had what you call take-home assignments, which were activities that were graded towards the end. And then, so everyone had to do the assignment, so that when you come back tomorrow morning, you have to submit the assignment that you have done. And then, of course, they were given some marks, some scores that contributed to the final evaluation. of which it granted you a certificate of completion of the course. So take-home assignment was one of the factors that really helped the teachers be kept engaged. So in most cases, they did their homeworks at night, so that in the morning when you come back, you're already done and you can submit your work to the master trainers. And finally, there was also a qualification. I mean, there was assessment that was done towards the end of the training. Towards the last day of the training, we did assessment to see who has been participating, who has not been participating, how much he has participated, so that in the end, you could also be able to filter those who have been participating, engaged, doing the work, and then whom we think this could be the potential resource trainers to go down and do the training, so that we achieve our goal of training 1,357 teachers that we had set before. So assessment was for qualification was there. And so therefore, towards the end, we had a number reduced because those who had not been able to meet the criteria were not able to actually qualify to go to the training session to the ground, which made it easier for us to know who is going to do it and how they're going to do it. Now, for the gap, for these projects, what we are doing is more for all the two projects. We didn't take a lot of time between the training session and the training in schools. So it could be like 1 month maximum, or maybe 20 days. Immediately after they go back to the schools, what they do is plan and then own your content. So make modifications as you need, and then do the training. So we'll come back and be able to visit and see how much you're doing the training. And then as you train, also you have to share the artifacts that are being generated in the classroom to know whether training is really moving and in the direction that we wanted to see. So that's it. But again, in the case of Zanzibar, for example, the resource trainers were dissolved all the way down. So they went all the way to the classes to see how the resource trainers are also training the teacher. And they also give feedback on how they're doing and what they could be able to improve tomorrow as they tackle the next day. So that helped them keep engaged, because they knew that there was someone who is actually watching over them, and then they have to report something as they go. Because towards the end, you also have to write a report of the training session, how you have done it. And then as you write the report, you give all your observations in the process and how they can be solved. So as we go to the last part, so now when you go to the actual training now, where the resource trainers are now going down and train the teachers in their own schools, before they go to train, we had a number of activities that we did to ensure that the teachers, these resource trainers, are at ease and they can go down and do the thing. So one of the technique we did was a day before the training. For example, our training program was from Monday to Saturday. So on Sunday before the training program, all the resource trainers had to come to an orientation session where we reminded them of the basic principles, the facilitation skills, what they have to do, the tools they have to use to collect data, how you have to write your report, what you have to put emphasis on as you take up your sessions. So this orientation session helped them be able to remember everything, to recap, and then be able to refresh on what they're going to do right from tomorrow. So we were able to receive a lot of good feedback in terms of how they're doing and in terms of how they have been implementing their training sessions back in their schools after that. So that made us be able to know really what was happening. So as the training was happening, the master trainers were also on the ground trying to give feedback as well and see how it's happening, and then also giving suggestions on how best you can be able to do it in case you are not on the right track. But we ensured that in the schools where the trainings are happening, so we had all the devices that were required, whether the teachers required to come with the devices, or we had computer labs that were ready for them to go and do the practice as they go. So that was the bigger picture on how best they could be able to do. But again, in the end, we gave the resource trainers the forms to be able to do self-assessment. Tell us what is your competence and what do you think you need to improve so that you get the enforcement on the areas where you think you are not, good enough, or you think you need some support more, so that in the end, you could also be able to go down and do the training as it is required. So that helped them be able to improve and how they could be able to do it better. So yeah, so if I have to put everything in summary, is during my PhD, I developed a model that was basically to help to improve the training in cascade mode, which the model had 5 phases. or 5 stages. The first phase was on attain, align, integrate, teach, and train. So I tried to unfold this model into the activities that we're doing in the project, especially in Zanzibar, and trying to see how it would be able to work and help improve the training program. So for example, in the attain phase, where we want to see the teachers attaining the required level of knowledge in terms of the content that they're going to train, we used to give, this attain was implemented as we're doing the teacher training program with the resource trainers being on the training program. So in that case, we ensure that the resource trainers have gone through the content enough, and then they have also been imparted on facilitation skills that helped them be able to remember how you have to stand in front of people, how you have to communicate to the other trainers, and how you have to present the material to them, and how you have to monitor how learning is happening as the teachers are moving forward. Now, on the align phase, what we did was basically to ensure that there is alignment between what is being taught on the ground, the content of the training, to what is on the curriculum or the required curriculum that we had designed for them to go through. So that alignment was really implemented. We wanted to see how it is actually happening on the ground as we did the training. Because the training was about competence-based curriculum implementation and the ICT integration, we wanted to see how the teachers are also integrating training programs, education technologies during the training. So as we designed the training, we did, on Monday, we had the session ICT integration. Then on Tuesday, we focused on competence-based curriculum implementation. Then on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we focused on the core subject, physics, chemistry, mathematics, and English. And then on the last day, we did more on facilitation, more on compilation, and then we concluded the training. So we wanted to see how alignment is happening and how you're mapping everything, but again, and how you're integrating technology into the subjects, different subjects, and different lessons, depending on the need and objective you're focusing. Now, towards the end, we had, during the sessions on Wednesday all the way to Friday, we had micro-teaching sessions on specific subjects. So if it's biology, for example, the master trainer designed a micro-teaching session where the resource trainers had to do the micro-teaching sessions in front of their friends, so that you get to receive feedback and then tune and improve, so that in tomorrow when you have your own session alone, it becomes easier for you to be able to do that. That was during the training program itself. Now, for the last phase of the A2IT2 model, we have what you call the train phase. The train phase is where now the resource trainers have to go down and do the training on the actual ground. Now, in this context, what we did was we had what you call a pilot of the content that we had designed, of which a pilot was involved the resource trainers going into a selected number of teachers, a number of schools, and then the resource trainers pitching the content before they have to go down and do the actual training. So the pilot part made them be able to practice, remember the content, follow the principles, so that when they have a bigger audience in front of them, the training becomes much more easier for them and they have to go. So the pilot was part of the practice they did, as it made them be sure of how they're going to do it as they take up their own big session. And now the full training is when they go all the way down to the schools and then make effective implementation of what they have been able to do during the training at the training center, during the pilot session where they have a group of small teachers, a small group of teachers coming to perspective and at a training center, and then finally onto their own full training program where they take up a good number of teachers and on a training program and then do the same training. And so if I have to put everything in perspective, from literature, we see there are a number of challenges that come when we design our training programs. Now, I tried to see how we have been able to solve all these challenges from the programs, from the projects we have done before. And therefore, for example, if we focus on trainers not being confident enough to train other groups of teachers back on their own context, what we did was we embedded facilitation skills on the last day of the training, so that they get to remember, they get to practice, and they get to apply it when they go to the pilot training. Now, during the pilot training, we could be able to see how they are featuring in terms of presentation is standing in front of that small group of teachers, and then that made them be able to be more confident, and so that when they go to the final training, it became much more easier for them. But again, when you give them micro-teaching sessions, we ensure that they have to stand and talk and then prepare and talk to the teachers, train the teachers. That gives them confidence at another level to ensure that they can also be able to stand in front of the other trainers and do the training as it is required. And then one of the challenge again is top-down approach. In this case, we had diffusion of master trainers coming all the way to the ground where the resource trainers are doing the actual ground. So the master trainers were always there to ensure that everything is happening and everything is working well. But again, we had these, education officers, for example, the director of teacher education department, for example, the director of ICT coming to visit the training sessions and then trying to inspire the teachers who are going on with the training session. On content dilution, so the micro-teaching sessions help them be able to remember, be able to grasp all the terminologies and keywords that we think were relevant in the context of teacher training programs. And when you speak of one-way transmission, no feedback issues. So we had evening reflections where the resource trainers reflected on what worked well, what didn't work, and what we're going to do on the next day. But again, we had also daily evaluations where towards the end, then the resource trainers or the teachers give us feedback of what worked well, what didn't work, what we can be able to improve tomorrow. And then the master trainers analyzed the responses and then provided feedback in the morning when we did the morning recap to the teachers, to the resource trainers on how best we can be able to do this and how this one is going to work. So the morning feedbacks were very important. Morning recaps were very important to give feedback on their queries that happened in the previous meeting when they were actually trying to give their evaluation feedback. Now, again, on the issue of longer periods between cascades, what is actually being suggested is that ensure that the training program is not too long. You don't take a lot of time to be able to go down and do the actual training, because the more you're putting a delay between the actual training and the actual training at the training center and what is going to happen down there, the more, the content, and the more they're going to forget about what was happening on the training center. So reduce the time between the training and the actual training that's happening on the ground, or else if you think there's going to be a longer delay in between, so think of the activities that you can be able to engage your learners by providing something like creating something like communities of practices, online communities of practice, or online learning communities where they can be able to reflect, be able to share some artifacts, some experiences on the same areas and domain of the training program, so that for them it becomes a refreshment. They refresh about the content, and then they can also be able to go back and train on the same before they forget and evaluate, forget everything. So that is basically a bigger picture of the strategies that we thought would worked well as we did the training with the 2 projects in Zanzibar and 1 in the mainland Tanzania. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Lucian, for the wonderful session. So, if anyone has any questions, so you can post in the chat comment session. So we will display those questions. And yeah, so I was just have a question while we are waiting for others to
Sure.
put some questions. So the micro teaching. So how long is the period, the time for the micro teaching? Is it 20 minutes or a 1 hour or?
No, in our case, for example, in Zanzibar, it was only 15 minutes.
Oh, 15
So you have to
minutes.
compress everything in 15 minutes because the number of resource trainers were many. So if you put 1 hour, that means you won't be able to finish. So it was 15 minutes. And what we did, we divided these groups because one class had about 40 resource trainers, participant 40. So we have to break them into other smaller groups. Other smaller classes, so that it becomes manageable and easy to see what's really happening. So when you speak of a micro teaching session, we always have less time, so like 10, 15 minutes or 20, and then you have less number of participants, like 10 or 5, even 3 or 4 participants in front of you, where you have to practice and do actual training.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So another question is that, so do you, in Tanzania in general, do you have any educational technology standards that, the content the master trainers or the experts developed that are aligned, or it's just the experts? Okay, for example, this ICT into this particular subject, they are lacking how to integrate physics, or is that the way, or do you have a national technology standards like that in Tanzania?
So we really don't have that. What we have, what we call Tanzania Institute of Education has, is that it has created a framework that will be guiding the development of any teaching aid, whether it's physical teaching aid or digital enabled teaching aid, has to go through. So when you speak like you're going to create an animation for class 1 students, then it has to have these standards, it has to have these contents, it has to look like this. So it has given some guidance that will guide us on how to design. But we don't have exactly the standards that will be guiding on how best you can be able to integrate. So we focus more on other frameworks that exist. For example, the UNESCO's ICT competence for complex framework for teachers. And then we also look into those European competence frameworks for teachers. Those are the ones we focus on more.
Sounds good. I think Deepak Pathak has a question. So I'm just showing it. Can you elaborate on a bit on facilitation skill? Little more
Okay.
on facilitation skill. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So when you speak of facilitation skills in our context, we had a session where, so that was normally on Saturday when we are just closing up. So it was a session where we taught them on a number of skills. For example, how you have to communicate, communication skills in front of your adult learners. And then we also went into presentation skills. So standing up and presenting your content, how you engage your content. But again, we taught them on how you design your training program and ensure that your training content also has engagement activities so that your learners are actually not going to sleep. So when you're training, you have to ensure that you have some energizers coming into perspective. All these facilitation skills that help the training program continue, the trainers participate effectively, are the skills that we actually imparted on them. So these were the areas where we focused on, more on adult learning principles as well, that when you are teaching adults, ensure that you have maybe after every 15 minutes or 20 minutes, put some activities, engage them, or tell them to stand up, or put them some energizers to ensure that the training program becomes easier for them and they feel like they're not overwhelmed and sleeping. So those were the areas more where we were focusing on.
Wonderful. So we have another question from Sharika. So what are the most effective strategies to ensure content integrity and trainer empowerment simultaneously in the cascade training model, especially when scaling program across diverse context?
Yeah, so this is a big question. So I'm trying to see if I try to unpack the cascaded training program. So the phases, the program design phase, and then you look into the training, actual training, and then the time elapsed, and then you go down to the actual training. So it depends on the on what stage you are and what strategies you're going to put at what particular point in time. So when you speak of cascaded training model, you have to think of all the 4 boxes and see what you have to do when you are doing the design, in fact. And it all starts with the design part, when you have to ensure that all the pieces are coming together to ensure that when you go on the ground, everything will work as you want to do it. For example, as you're designing, one of the strategies you have to ensure is that your content is not too large. Because in most cases, when the cascaded training is being implemented, it's like you're imparting content to all your trainers. You have a lot of content that is going to be embedded into the heads, which they're not going to breathe even to think of what they're going to do. So put less content, ensure that you have a number of activities in between where the trainers will be, the participants will be engaged and will be doing something, and then towards the end, do some evaluation. So evaluation will help you be able to see what worked and what didn't work. And then in that context, you can be able to improve the next day or the next training program that you're going to do in the process. Now, to ensure that content integrity, what you can do is ensure that the teachers are doing practices. For example, if you give them a micro-teaching session, they can also be able to recite the content, or do it 2 times, 3 times. In that case, the content, knowledge about the content won't go away, because you have done a lot of practices as you work on the process. And that will give you power to ensure that you're not going to dilute the content as you go down, but you always have the same content as it is required as you go down to the ground. So I think these are the issues. But again, think of training evaluation as one of the components that comes across all the levels. Even if you're doing the actual master trainer to resource trainer training, evaluation is important across the training. Then again, as you go down to do the training, so evaluation is also important because it gives you some data that will help you be able to refine some stages of the training program as you go. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so since it's I think I don't see any other question, but since we have another 3 more minutes, so regarding the training evaluation, so do you do any program evaluation? Like you did 2 big programs, right? The overall one in the island
Yeah.
and the other mainland.
Yes.
So how do you? Can you just a little bit talk more about the program, the over, not the training evaluation? I
Yes. Yes.
know the
Yes.
program evaluation.
Yes, yes. So in the case, in the project in Zanzibar, what we did, so after each cohort is being trained, so maybe after 3 months or 4 months, we did the monitoring, and then we wanted to go on the ground, first of all, in the schools where the teachers are, those teachers who are participating in training are teaching, to see whether they are really doing the, implementing the competence-based curriculum as we taught them during the training, and then trying to see how are they engaging the students. So we did like a lesson observation. You sit in the back and then take up a lesson and see how the teacher is doing and what are the activities happening in the classroom. And then we could also be able to give feedback. So that was one. But again, we also did, a monitoring and evaluation to look into how the resource trainers are also doing their training back into their own context. Because not only were they resource trainers, but they're also teacher trainers because they have to go back and train the teachers. So we also monitored it to see how it's really happening. We supplied also some questionnaires to their heads of schools to get feedback on how this was happening after that period of time. And they also gave us very good feedback on how best they're doing and the experiences they're bringing up, how they're progressing with the training, what they're doing to ensure that the content is also, the training is also happening and life continues back in their own context. And the feedback that we got was really very interesting because it helped us be able to see what you can do as we get to give awards to the teachers. Because towards the end, we had to give them certifications. So certifications also involved your assignments that we are submitting, involves also the evaluation that you submitted. We had also some pre-test and post-test scores that were coming, but again, the application back into your own context in school. So as we went to do the monitoring back in the schools, we see the lesson, how it's happening, and then we get feedback from the heads of schools about what they're doing, that compiled all together to bring up their certificates. And certificates were in 3 categories. So certificate of competence, and then certificate of participation, and certificate of excellence, depending on what you're doing and the stages you have gone through.
Wonderful, wonderful. I know
Yeah.
it was very interesting to hear, and I know it's our time it's up, but I just want to thank one more time Dr. Lucian for taking your time for sharing with us, and I also just want to thank the team behind this masterclass. I especially want to thank Dr. Sarika Chaho and the program committee chair for coordinating this event, and also Dr. Lakshmi and the website team, Vivek and Sandeep for creating the StreamYard technical team. Just want to thank you all. And we are looking forward to see you another masterclass next month. And one more time, thank you again for all joining us.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.